Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from the coffee break. So we will be continuing with our next panel. It's quite, all of them are important, but this one for me, since I'm representing AgroTV as well, it's quite important for me. Global food security, challenges and opportunities. I want to call to stage who's going to be our moderator, and I will let him introduce his speakers. Mr. Howard Beasey, partner and co-founder of 8 Degrees East. Can you please come to stage?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for persevering. We're almost at the tail end. Last couple of panels for the day. So if you're out in the lobby and you can still hear me, come on in. And what I hope to have here over the next hour is a robust discussion over something that is not a new subject, but has been highlighted by the recent events with the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces, and that is global food security. Before we get on into it, let me invite my 3 panelists that are here with me today to discuss this. The first and foremost I'll start with is the Honorable James Kakooza, former Minister of Health of Uganda and a member of the East African Community Parliament. Mr. Kakooza, please join me on the stage. Second, round of applause. Second, Mr. Borys Shestopalov is the co-founder of HD Group and Uparks. Mr. Shestopalov is an agri-food entrepreneur and a food tech and food strategy expert. Borys, please. Welcome. And last but not least, to cover the industry side and that of the global logistics supply chain, we have Mr. Diego Munoz, Managing Director, Destination Marketing, Turkey, Global Trade, ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. Mr. Munoz, is he still getting coffee? Quite possibly. Okay, well, we'll have him join us when he gets here. So without further ado, let me start off. I don't like to stand behind podiums, so I'll probably move around. I have this nice high chair if I choose to sit. So I've been struck over a couple of things over the past 2 days. One, I've made a lot of good contacts and friends, so I appreciate that. There's something I think that's notable here. Most of what we've talked about, certainly the horrific events that brought us together, but one theme has been opportunity. Opportunity to do better, opportunity to tackle challenges in an array of issues. So I'm inspired by that. The second word that I constantly hear, and I'll give a quote here, but it's been logistics. And most of you may not even know who this gentleman is. His name was General John J. Pershing. He was commander of U.S. forces in World War I on Europe, and he famously was quoted as saying, "Infantry wins battles, logistics wins war." So logistics is critically important to all the topics we've discussed, and it'll be certainly paramount to the topic here today. Now, as we stand, or I stand, you sit here, the immediate problem may be actually underway of being addressed. Just 2 kilometers from here, Dolmabahce Palace, right now, representatives from Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey, and the UN are gathering, and they may be on the verge of signing an agreement to allow the more than 20 million tons of grain that is currently stockpiled in Ukraine to make its way to the global market. So I think we can all adjourn, problem solved, it's being addressed. However, I think the topic of today's discussion, and what I hope these gentlemen will help me illustrate, is that the global food security is not a new problem. It's an ongoing problem, and what has happened in Ukraine is simply a symptom of that, and that is the one domino falls in the global supply chain of grain, and the whole system starts to shake. The whole system starts to wobble. And so I think it's critical that, Borys, I think you can help us on this with your agri-tech, ag-tech, and things like this. I think it's critical that we talk about how we solve the greater problem. But first, I've been asked by almost everybody I've met, what's 8 degrees east? 8 degrees east is simply the latitude of Zurich, Switzerland, where my company is located. Simple, done. 8 Degrees East is a business strategy, business advisory group. My partner, Steve, you can raise your hand down here in the front, is with us as well. And I'm very honored to be here. The second question I got today is, what do you know about food security? Simple answer is nothing. I like food. I like security. A bit on my background, and as I thought about it a bit more, and I thank Tristan for inviting me to be here, I thought about it, I may be actually a good candidate for this job today. My background is 22 years of U.S. military service. I was a U.S. Marine for 22 years. I fought in Iraq, Afghanistan. I've seen the horrors of war. I've seen the horrors of famine. I've seen the worst of the worst. So I acutely am here, standing here today, to talk to you about how we solve one of these great challenges that our globe faces today. Secondly, I ran for a number of years, 5 years to be exact, a business and trade organization that was principally focused on U.S.-Turkey trade, to develop our interrelated trade, to increase our trade volumes, business cooperation, investment, FDI, and all of the alike. So I do have a bit of sense of the interconnectedness of the world today and how critical that is to the stability and prosperity of everybody around the globe. So enough about me. Let me go ahead, and I'm going to turn the floor to Minister Kakooza first to make your opening remarks, 5 to 7 minutes, if I might ask you to do, and then we'll get to Borys, and hopefully by that time maybe Diego has found his way to the stage and will join us. So without further ado, Mr. Kakooza.
Thank you very much. Fellow delegates, as he has mentioned, the war is undesirable at any time. This is the reason why on October 24th, 1945, delegates from some 51 countries at San Francisco Conference created a universal organization and committed to maintaining international peace and security, developing friendly relations among nations, and promoting social progress, better living standards, and human rights. I want to thank the International Trade Council, who are organizers of this Global Economic Impact Forum on Ukraine. And I want to take this opportunity to salute the fellow delegates, and especially those from Ukraine. I extend my deepest emphasis to the several Ukrainian families that have lost their lives, loved ones, and the devastating destruction on infrastructure and the way of life that have been caused by this war. A war that could largely have been avoided, a war that can still be stopped. My overview: there are no real victors in wars. All parties involved have to suffer the consequences, with often high numbers of casualties on both sides. Rather than dealing with the direct effects of people, politics, the economy, and the environment of two countries of war, namely Russia and Ukraine, my submission will restrict itself to the spillover effect of this war on the neutral parties to this war, particularly the continent of Africa, and even more specifically in Uganda, where I come from. As an economist, my duty here is not to point fingers at who aggressor or the provocateur is. That is an area of experts of the intricacies of the international relations. My duty is to give you a somber but a factual narrative of negative economic impact on the war in Africa, with precisely from a most Ugandan perspective. To put this discussion into focus, a liter of petrol in Uganda, as February 21st, 22nd, when the war broke out, proper was slightly above 80 cents in US dollars, and today it's well above $1.80. This is only the tip of the iceberg. As I will demonstrate in the course of my submission, the economic impact and the costs of the Ukraine will not be borne only by the innocent wheat farmer from Donetsk region, but also the cab driver on my capital city, Kampala Road, in the capital city of Uganda, some good away 7,689.7 kilometers away. The economic impact of Ukraine war on Africa, fellow delegates, while Africa is yet to fully recover from the socio-economic repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, The Russia-Ukraine conflict poses another major threat to the global economy, with the many African countries being directly affected. We were still reeling from the unprecedented shocks of the pandemic, and now this. Just within a few weeks, global wheat, sunflower, and oil crude prices have soared to unprecedented levels. Africa is heavily reliant on food imports from both countries, and the continent is already experiencing price shocks and disruption in the supply chain of these commodities. The conflict has hugely impacted on food security in Africa, both through availability of pricing in some food crops, particularly wheat and sunflower, as well as socioeconomic recovery and growth, triggered by rising uncertainties in global financial markets and supply chain systems. Over the past decade, the continent has been growing demand for cereal crops, including wheat and sunflower, which has been mainly supported by imports than local production. Africa's wheat imports increased by 68% between 2007 and 2019, surging to 40 million tons. Russia and Ukraine, both the often referred as the world's bread basket, are major players in the export of wheat and sunflower to Africa. North Africa, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, and Tunisia. Nigeria in West Africa, Ethiopia and Sudan in East Africa. South Africa accounts for 80% of wheat imports. Wheat consumption in Africa is projected to reach 76 million tons by 2025, to which 48.3 million tons, or 63.4%, is projected to be imported outside of the continent. On the other hand, the sanctions imposed on Russia by Western countries have further exacerbated commercial flows between Russia and Africa due to the close of vital port operation in the Black Sea. Russia is one of the world's biggest exporters of fertilizers. Concerns are growing that worldwide shortage of fertilizer will lead to rising food prices with a knock-on effect for agriculture production and food security. Russia is also the world's third largest oil producer behind the United States and Saudi Arabia, if the research is correct. The disruption of oil prices on the world market is expected to lead to an increase of fuel prices and higher costs of food production. Some regions, including the Horn of Africa and Sahel region, are at a greater risk of food security due to country-specific shocks, climate change, export restriction, stock peeling, especially rising fertilizer and other energy-intensive input costs will negatively impact the next agriculture season as a result of ongoing conflict. The Uganda experience. Fellow delegates, as I have already alluded to, Africa isn't immune from the Ukraine war's fallout on global economic activity. In Uganda, bread has become almost unaffordable and a car fuel prohibitively expensive. In this case, with other African countries, Uganda strongly depends on wheat and oil imports. The increasing bread and fuel prices following the Ukraine war and the sanctions hit Ugandans and had and could have devastating impact on the country's economy. Talking of trade between Uganda and Ukraine, it reminds me of wheat, military hardware, and education, especially in science studies. Now, according to the Observatory Economic Complexity, a global private trade data bank, Ukraine's main export to Uganda in 2020 was wheat worth $141 million, followed by unclassified items worth $66 million, ironware, special purpose truck, helicopters, and aircraft parts. Uganda exported to the country leaf tobacco and coffee worth $13 million, and USA 4.3 million respectively, while aircraft parts and accessories were worth $10 million. These trade exchanges have certainly been affected. Research also shows that failure of East European products to reach the international market has created a greater impact of scarcity and prices increase than the actual production in the affected countries. The same is true with exports, especially from Africa and East, of those countries. Currently, passenger and cargo aircraft on the region is disrupted and it is impossible to enter the Ukrainian space. Unfortunately, the exports from Uganda and other East African countries reach most of Eastern Europe through countries like Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, according to the exporters. According to information available, global wheat prices have jumped by a third from $345 per ton to $460 since the fighting began. But other items that Uganda does not import directly from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus have also been affected. The global oil and gas industry, for example, is already affected with crude oil prices skyrocketing. The commodity was already seeing price increase due to global scarcity as demand was outstripping supply to almost a year. For Uganda and other East African countries, it was made worse by a truck driver strike at key border Uganda entry over the cost of mandatory COVID-19 testing. On the social side of the spectrum, data from Uganda Ministry of Foreign Affairs show that at the beginning of the war, Uganda had at least 100 citizens in Ukraine, mostly students, but also residents who had settled there with families. However, the ministry expects that there are many more Ugandans in the country, some unknown because they have not registered their presence there with the Ugandan authorities. It's unfathomable, but possible that some have these since died. Ladies and gentlemen, picture this diplomatic dilemma. Uganda's ambassador to Ukraine sits in Moscow. Russia is also in charge of Georgia, Moldova and Uzbekistan and Belarus. Ukraine embassy in Uganda is in the border area in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Most of the Ugandans who go for studies in Ukraine and the other former Soviet countries go for science, especially medicine, engineering, and agrotechnology. Before February 2022, few people expected Russia to launch a direct attack on Ukraine. At least in the next few days, all hours, save for close allies like China and Belarus. The war in Ukraine has consequences around the globe, including Uganda, where food staples become more expensive. I want to tell this dignified audience that now higher prices and smaller portions have left many in Uganda on the edge. The negative impact of the war has also had far-reaching impact on the common man. For those who have ever been to Uganda or read the rot in the Uganda way of life, you must have heard of the rikas called Rolex. Most of streets and markets in Uganda have at least one vendor firing up a hot plate ready to cook for food, which is a term used to mean Rolex, and it usually comes with tomatoes, cabbage, and onion, and is priced everywhere from the 1,000 and 2,000 Ugandan shillings, which is 28 to 57 cents. Uganda is one of the most countries dependent on Russia and Ukraine for some wheat imports. More than half of Ugandan imports of this vital grain come from Russia and Ukraine. And the shortage is being felt by the country's street vendors who rely heavily on wheat on cooking oil to produce their main offerings of Rolex, chapatis, and chikamandos, and other chapati wrap with beans. To meet these rising costs, many vendors are reducing the size of their offerings, leaving customers hungry and lacking the nutrients that would normally get them from their work days. Way forward. Nonetheless, amidst the crisis created by the Ukraine war, I see a silver lining to reduce reliance on food imports in Africa and indeed Uganda. Investors, we need to focus on this because the cost of production and sustainability should be achieved. With the developed world, you've got machinery, mechanization, where Africa is wanting in that. Africa country Uganda must also see the current geopolitical crisis an opportunity to reduce its reliance on food imports from outside the continent. Instead, African countries need to take advantage of their 60% global share of valuable land to grow more food for domestic consumption and export to the global market. This would lower the number of people facing food nutrition insecurity caused by external shocks. In 2021, the African Union Commission, the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, worked with African countries to create a common African position ahead of the Food System Summit in line with the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The African Common Position is a synthesis and a unified view of how to transform Africa's food system over the next decade, primarily resilience in the face of growing vulnerability and shocks. It's anchored in the comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program and the Malabo Declaration on accelerating agriculture growth. Rapid expansion on agriculture and food productivity and production has been identified as one of the game-changing solutions to prevent future disruption. The supply chain of wheat and sunflower across Africa, countries that produce these cereals need to increase their capacity to produce and supply to other countries through intra-African trade. And those that do not should consider incorporating specific food crops in the agriculture value chain. This will reduce the reliance on wheat and grain imports from Russia and Ukraine, and most importantly, promote intra-Africa trade and grow African agribusiness sectors. Another level in transforming Africa's food system in the African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into effect on 1st July 2021. African countries must take advantage of the world's largest free trade area. The trade treaty is expected to offer $2.5 trillion in combined gross GDP, and agribusiness will be significant to contribute to this growth. The African Continent Free Trade Area will increase production and value addition, as well as ensure adequate quality infrastructure and food safety standards to supply and grow local regional agro-food markets. Regarding the oil and gas factor, to avoid future food price shocks caused by rising oil and gas prices on the global market, African countries must improve the oil and gas production and exploration capability to fill any gaps that may occur as a result of supply chain disruption among the major global producers. African countries that produce fuel and gas such as Algeria, Angola, Cameroon, Republic of Congo, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Libya, Mozambique, Nigeria, Senegal, Sudan, and Tanzania should explore boosting production, filling the gas and oil gap within the continent and beyond to alleviate fuel price shocks, which could contribute to lower food costs. In addition, African governments should invest or attract greater international investment in oil and gas exploration, particularly in countries where subterranean oil reserves are believed to exist but have yet to be explored. I would like to conclude by strongly affirming that regional solutions are prerequisite to addressing structural weakness and vulnerabilities, including poverty, inequality. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has once more exposed the urgent need for policy and investment choices to sustain and build viable, resilient, and inclusive food system on the African continent. With these few remarks, I would like to stop here. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Minister Kakooza, for a very data-rich presentation and really gets to the heart of sort of the pain point, the ripple effect of what's going on in the global food crisis and some of those that will be most affected by this. Before we proceed, I want to thank, well, first let me give the apologies for Mr. Munoz. He was detained and unable to make it, but we've had a fill-in, very graciously, Mr. Alfred Preuss, the president of the Austrian-Ukrainian Business Association, has joined us on stage, and I very much appreciate him joining us, and we'll hear from him in just a moment. But before I do that, let's turn to the tech side. Let's turn to the agribusiness side and hear from Borys on his perspectives on some of the solutions that may be available for the future of global food crisis.
Maybe not have big solutions. First of all, maybe needs to talk about different side of this problem, because situations about Russian aggressions in Ukraine and food crisis, what has happened after this, It's a topic of this forum and topic of all the newspaper now and on the inform now. But it's understand why, because before the war, Ukrainian it's a global food supplier, and in 2021, Ukrainians agri-food export was equivalent to feeding around 400 plus million people. And understand why today this problem exciting a lot of country who is reliable to Ukrainian food business. And but need to understand this problem has a two sides. It's very important questions, because one side it's a picture what we have now. Ukrainian ports blocked. We have more than around 250 million tons of different type of goods. First of all, last year crops in our port, and we start to collect harvest of this year. What does we have now? Now we have internal price in Ukraine, price inside from the farms, around 2 times less than cost of real value of this crops, because who is now main player of this market? It's a logistics company, and but not like just like company. It's a logistics situations. Now price from the silo in west of Ukraine to port in, for example, Constanta, cost 2 times more than price of crops. And it's just start to this problem, because why it needs to decide this, what needs to solve this problem, because it's just start of situations. Because exactly immediately after the finish of harvest time, start to time to preparing new harvest. If our farmers don't have enough money.
Yeah. So let me actually stop you there. I'd like to have a bit of conversation about this. So assume we have an agreement today. We open up transport. We're able to start shipping grain through the Black Sea. How does that affect it? I mean, there's obviously a ripple effect. We haven't been shipping for months now.
Okay, my opinion, it's just part of problem. Okay, it's a gift. It's a gift very shortly decision, but just for this time. And first of all, it's a give a place. Okay, it's give little bit money, but not full money, because gap it's too much, and this logistics corridor it's very expensive. It's not give full solutions. It's not like situations like 1 year before. It's not give for us 100% of this problem. And okay, we delivery, I hope this 25,000 million ton of grain of this last harvest, but it's it's very delicate situations, and I'm not sure it's work like watches, like a Swiss watches during all this time. Needs to understand. It needs to understand main solutions. It is just exactly stop of the war. All another solutions. It is just temporary solutions. And what I try to say, we have 2 solutions. First of all, start to what I talked yesterday. It's a start to food processing in Ukraine, develop food processing in Ukraine for growing ready products for delivery. And for this case, influence of price of the logistics, it's less than for the raw material. It's one side. Another question needs to remember, we lost now around 30% of territory. 30% of territory, it's 30% of harvest. It's really decrease quantity of harvest for next year.
So what you're saying is that this is going to be a perennial problem next year as well, because we'll face reduced harvest, so there'll be less grain in the market. She'll drive prices
really,
higher. and-
really reduce, and for this case, price more go up.
Correct.
You know situations with the oil. It means with oil. I means diesel and petrol for the agriculture workers, and all these factors go price up.
So those are the short-term realities, for sure. I wonder if maybe Alfred could give a bit of perspective as he sits on the Austrian side, from Europe side. How do you see this situation and this problem and current situation, maybe potential agreement, and then where do we go from here?
Okay, I'm not an expert in that, but I have some idea and some knowledge. And I'm also speaking on behalf of the International Council of Business Associations and Chambers in Ukraine, so it's not just Austria. I think the problem is even deeper than Borys has described, because due to the programs like crop proceeds, etc., the harvest is sold already. So that means that the farmers don't have the money for sowing in the next season. So it's even more grave than you said first. From the European perspective, I would say it's clear that this is a political game of Putin, not only against Ukraine. Ukraine, in that Putin wants to suffocate Ukraine, closing down the whole Black Sea. As everybody knows, Ukraine, and I need not repeat it, is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 in several agricultural products, raw products in the world market. And this, as Mr. Minister has pointed out, is creating a big crisis in African countries and Asian countries. And that may lead to a refugee crisis again. And Putin is waiting for that, because where would they go? They would not go to Russia. They go to Europe. And Putin would lean back and would say, ha, now you have the consequence. So this is a geopolitical game of the very, very cute Mr. Putin. Okay, what to do? Ukraine, in my view, is in a kind of a locked-in situation, because all what is done by rail, by truck, by ship, Danube, etc., this may cover 10, 20, 30% of the whole problem, because rail, you have the different gauges, yeah? In Ukraine and going to Western Europe, etc. So this is not only a question of price, of logistic costs, this is a question of available capacity in the rails and for the hoppers and this and that and this and that. So the whole situation cannot be solved. What I see today, and again, I'm not a wizard and I'm not top knowledgeable, what I see today, if I'm not wrong with the sense and the mind of Mr. Putin, he may want to blackmail Ukraine and the European Union to give something up in terms of sanctions, etc., etc. So, and this is again creating a problem in Europe, because to weaken the sanctions, which had been negotiated for weeks in some cases, very tough negotiations, would divide Europe. So this is an ugly situation for Ukraine, because without a solution, it would be suffocated, not being able to export 60-70% of the potential. And by this losing several, maybe even many billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, tactic of Putin, because I'm not sure whether the West, so this is America and Europe, will give infusions for years, yeah, of several $billion a month. So this is really a grave problem, and I'm not sure if Putin will give up his very good negotiation position for smaller concessions from Europe. So this is not yet solved, and I would be positively surprised, and I would drink a bottle of champagne if there is a signature And if there is a signature, whether this will hold.
Correct.
Because Putin is well known. He's
Yeah, we're signing.
saying one, he's thinking two, yeah, and doing three. Thank you.
No, I appreciate those remarks, and undoubtedly you're correct, and it's going to be multi-year challenge. Money is one issue, funding, the lost revenues, the problems for the farmers, things like this. I wonder if we come back to something you talked about, which is, on the global problem of food security, it seems to me that one of the solutions might be greater production in geographic proximity to where the products are being utilized. So you mentioned in your opening remarks that there is part of the East African Union that you spoke about, that there is going to be some efforts there. Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, what we are trying to do in Africa, mostly when we are trying to make a way forward, we are trying to create an intra-trade like European Union, like what is now. We have SADC, we have East African Community, which is comprised of 7 countries, which is Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. We are creating an intra-trade market that can really deal with the East African Customs Union, with one customs union, one common market, one monetary union, and increase the capacity to invite the foreign direct investment within those, that we increase the capacity of production. Because where we are now, it's a situation which is not easy. What I know, there are some people, investors, who have got money, and mechanization machines which are advanced in technology. So what we are trying to form a bloc. In West Africa, they have ECOWAS. In South Africa, they have SADC. So we are trying within to have a common market within the region. But we are trying also on the other side to encourage the foreign investment, FDIs, direct investment. We are reducing on taxes. We are reducing on people who want to invest in. Any profits can be taken back to their home country. This is what we are looking at, that once we have a common market and we collect foreign direct investment in those blocks, we trade together, the market becomes huge. And what I know in East African countries, soils, they are really, the cost of production is cheaper in agro-processing, because this is where a country has soils whereby you don't need fertilizers, which has been imported from these countries. You don't need to do much. That means the cost of production is cheaper, and it's worth it to invest in money than another region.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I truly, I think that is certainly, should be a focus in the future of global food security. Is
of course, this is what,
solution.
In my culture, we've got a language that where 2 elephants fight, it's the grass which suffers most. But you need to necessitate the mass of invasion. So we are trying to form blocks within the regions that we can sustain. Because what is happening, nobody can project when is the war ending. And what do we do right now?
Right. Yeah, there's a short-term demand, need, necessity versus midterm, and then, as you talk about, the long term.
Yeah.
Borys, if I might come back to you then, you talked about, this was boiled down as just a shipping problem. If we could just open the shipping lines, it would all go away. This is what the major problem was presented to the broader world, and I would say that most that are not experts or really following this closely, that's probably what they believe. It's just a shipping problem. Now that this agreement is maybe signed, the problem goes away. That's obviously not true. How much of Ukraine's grain and other products, the seed oils and things like this, how much of that is exported via the Black Sea and out through Bosphorus to the world? And then other mechanisms like you talked about, truck, rail, et cetera. And how do we address those issues? Because obviously that was there before. You talk about gauges, rails, this kind of thing. That's always been there. So how was it dealt with before, and what's the maybe solution sets that might be on the horizon?
Universal solution, it's the stop of the war. it's universal solutions, but it's not happened today, and it's a pity it's not happen maybe in this year. We must be preparing everything what is possible. But needs to remember, before the 24th of February, Ukrainian has approximately together 150 million ton of goods, which is delivery through all the transport way, but 80% through the sea. Just Black Sea port, it's around 8 million ton per month. What is needs to make now? Don't have unique solutions, but last 2 days we talk about different type of solutions. One of this, it's a more faster developed dry port near the west border of Ukraine. Ukrainian Ministry of Infrastructure and some private company preparing some 2-3 big projects, which is a help to deliver grain and crops through the border. Other questions very important. It needs to increase very fast temporary storages in the west part of country for save crops, for save money. And okay, if we don't have possibility to transfer immediately full capacity, but we have another good things. We don't have winter time. If we have dry port and we have railway gauge, it's for all year. If we very fast build temporary storages for save crops this year and second and next year, we have very good chance for save more crops, and most of problem we solve through this case.
Thank you. So dry ports and temporary stores seem like the immediate demand. Alfred, if I could come back to you, then I know you don't, but you sit in the EU. Where do you see the help for those kinds of projects coming from on the global scale? Is it through EU funding mechanisms? Is it broader than that? How should we tackle that problem?
There must be international funding, like in many other areas. And this funding should include to improve the railway infrastructure, at the same time modernizing it. Because if Ukraine wants to join the European Union, maybe they change the gauge, at least in some areas. They use the rebuilding of the infrastructure, the problems in export, to have the Western European gauge. That is one thing. The second thing, in my view, is a quite negative consequence or quite negative aspect, because even if you create additional capacity by rail, etc., this does not alleviate the cost problem, logistic cost. And the logistic cost means that the price of the agricultural goods, wheat, corn, maize, and whatever, is maybe double or triple. And the question is, what is the world market price? And what can the countries in Africa, in Asia, afford to pay? So this is creating another funding problem. It's a kind of a vicious circle.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's the trickle-down effect of all of this, of course, is really quite monumental. So we have just a few minutes left. I always like to hear from the audience. So if there are folks in the audience that have questions, and I would encourage questions, then I see one over here. I'll come around, give you the microphone, and please address your question, and we'll try and answer the best we can. So let me come down here first.
Thank you. I want to ask for the next season. How about biofuel? I mean, biodiesel. I mean, it would decrease the like transport necessity, like and oil prices are high. It will it can bring more income. I mean, it will be bad for Asia and Africa, I know, but maybe it can be a seasonal solution for Ukraine.
If you ask a question, I'll give you a candy.
Okay, may I give an answer?
Please.
We have a shortage of food supply. We have a shortage of corn, wheat, etc. So for biofuels, corn, maize, rapeseed is used. So would you solve the food crisis in that you are using it for diesel or for petrol? And this is a question which had been discussed in Western Europe for years, in that what is the priority? Is the priority food, or is the priority diesel or petrol? And under the given circumstances, I feel, this is my humble personal opinion, this is the wrong track to use it for biofuels. And there was a proposal here yesterday or today in the morning, projects, biodiesel, etc., etc. Of course, that's good if we are affluent in the agricultural products which are used for production of biofuels. But this is not the case here.
And one maybe small additional. It's exactly in my private experience. We are one of the biggest Ukrainian producer of flour, and when we produce flour, of course, we produce wheat bran. Wheat bran, it's a very important thing for the feeding of animals. We export. It's one of our main positions for export before 24 of February. It's the price for this product depends on the time and depends on the quantity of green mass, but it's something around 110 euro CPT, 120 euro CPT. In April, we selling by zero, just for delivery from our flour factory, because it's impossible to continue procedures. Now we have a contract, long contract for selling wheat bran. We have a big contract for $50 now. $50 now is ex work from our factory. For this case, we start to burn wheat bran for the heating technology water in our procedures. For this case, just for this case, for this year, we used good products, ready products, for next stage, like biodiesel or exactly to burn in our systems. But it's just utilizations.
Thank you, Will.
Can I ask?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, I have two questions. Anybody who is willing can answer. First one is related to business activities. Second one will be a little bit more political. Every investor is looking for economic stability and political stability in the country. That's the first. Second, they're looking for profit, to be precise. Do you really think that Ukrainian government will be willing to create chances for those investors to have monopolistic or oligopolistic activities in case they invest in the country earlier, prior to the other investors that would invest after the war? That's the first question. And the second one, when we say a country, we mean in general terms. But when we go specific, we can mention whether this is the government doing this, whether this is the nation, whether this is the institution, or whatever. This war we are talking about, in your opinion, is the war between the governments or between the nations? Thank you so much.
Any takers?
First of all, it's a question part of the government. I think it's better if there's some ministry in this whole answer to these questions. It's a little bit difficult for me answer for the Ukrainian government. But I answer for the second question first because my opinion is it's more than a war between the government. It's a war Russia against the Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian idea, Ukrainian people. It's more than just a war between the different government. It's a war exactly against the Ukrainian, like big part of Europe Union of future. My opinion.
So I do have someone here that'd like to take a stab at this.
Yeah, so Lisa is co-member of Ukrainian parliament, and I cannot say on behalf of Ukrainian government, but I can say on behalf of Ukrainian parliament as a member of Zelensky party also. So regarding the first question and whether there could be a monopoly of some investors. You know that recently we voted for the oligarchization law, which actually says that there shouldn't be any monopoly in Ukraine, and it includes, of course, political monopoly, the control of the media, but now I also think, together with our policy of decentralization, we are very much interested that we have diversity, and we have different investors, we have different people who will help us to develop different industries, different regions, so we are interested in diversity, not in monopoly. And regarding the second question that I really want to answer, because I could feel that this question sometimes is asked, and especially in those countries that are closer to, let's say, Arab world, Asia, and a little bit further. I can hear this question also in Turkey. This war is aggression of Putin and lots of Russian people against Ukraine. That includes all who is in Ukraine. That includes, yes, our government, it includes our society. If it was only between some of the governments, that would be much more easier. The question is that we see that even the polls in Russia show that Russian people support war. They like seeing that the Russian army is killing Ukrainians, Ukrainian infrastructure. So, and you can see all of us who are speaking, most of us, you see the representatives of business, of the parliament, of the trade unions chamber. We speak, first of all, as humans and as Ukrainians. We don't speak only with a political agenda. We are very much united just now, right now, and this is very special. And that's why we support President Zelensky efforts. That's why we have unity in a society right now, because it concerns all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent answer. That deserves 2 candies.
May I have an addition to that?
Sure.
As Western European, who has been living until now 15 years in Ukraine, who has an Ukrainian family, etc. As Western European, I have to observe that the question, what kind of war is it, is sometimes in Germany, in Austria, in some other Western European countries, not seen the right way. And I have to fully agree to you, I can't agree more. The war by Putin is to extinguish, to erase Ukraine as a nation, as people, as a language, as a culture, etc. Let Ukraine, including the name, disappear forever. And those people, and I have been at the Ostausschuss of Deutsche Wirtschaft, so this is a German Federation, Federation of German Industries in Berlin 5 weeks ago at the annual meeting. I heard top people, and I may tell it like it is, deputy chairman of BASF Group, etc., real industrial captains. They are short-sighted, and they don't see that this war has a European perspective. They want peace, they want a ceasefire, they want to continue their business, and even in Austria, I'm an Austrian. I don't know. Maybe Putin will be welcomed by the Austrian Chamber of Commerce in 1 or 2 years. Hi, let's do business. That happened in 2015, after the first aggression. So this is a real aggression against Western values, and it is fought in Ukraine. And if it can't be stopped in Ukraine, I say this as a Western European, it will go on, like Medvedev, etc. Vladivostok to Lisbon. Just to quote. Thank you.
No, I think that's a great segue for, we have one more panel today, and I'm sorry, I do have to wrap up. I know I have some questions back there, but can you do it for the next one? There's another panel right after this. Can you hold the question? Okay, one last question. Go ahead. Do you have a mic?
Okay. Istanbul Postcom TR, Hülya Karahan. When will this war end and how? Who will end this war?
Anybody want to predict? I'll take that question. I think, this is personal opinion, I think it is not, the horizon is not there yet, my opinion. I think we can all hope and we can all wish, and these kind of events I think will precipitate that, hopefully sooner than later. But I would hazard no guess as to when the hostilities end. I think if history has shown us anything, that these types of conflicts can become stale and last for a long time. I don't wish that on anybody, and I hope that is not the case here, but I wouldn't put anybody under the spotlight for that, so I'll take that question. But that's my opinion, and I think the solution to that lies mainly in the hands of the Russian government and at the hands of Vladimir Putin as to when this war will end, as it is an outright aggression against the Ukrainian people. So
There is no exit possibility,
Correct.
and this is the problem.
Correct. So thank you. That was a great discussion. I appreciate you indulging me on my non-standard approach to the moderation side. Thank you. Please join me in a round of applause for Alfred, Borys, and Minister Kakooza. Thank you. Stick around. We got one more panel to go, and then we'll wrap up the 2 days of events. So thank you so much for your attention.